My name is Joe Peroni, and this is the Rise Above Project. And today I was going to talk about a study that was published in May of 2020. The study concluded that liberals are about 150% more likely to have mental illness than conservatives. And I thought this was interesting, so I figured I would read more into it. Now, the other part that made me interested in it is that the information from this study, not the study itself, but the information from it, has been pushed, it's been cited, it's been repeated ad nauseum from conservatives, from conservative news outlets, fake news outlets, conservative radio show hosts, podcasters, TV personalities. And I thought, we really need to take a look at this to see what they're getting at, because there's always more information that's available, and they never say why they feel the way they do. They just start spouting off information. I thought it was pretty interesting, because to be fair, I was actually going to do the show about how liberals, and because they do have a tendency to be more compassionate, to be more empathetic, they see the whole world. They don't just see themselves. And they do tend to have higher educations. This is correlated to having more anxiety and depression in your life. And I was going to go through the show that way and explain some of those reasons and how to deal with that. But the show didn't become that, because what I really wanted to do here is, first of all, look at the study. And we have to take a look at the study here to do three major things. We can do others, but let's keep it down to three. I know people don't like long shows. So number one, question: is it a valid and legitimate study? Number two, in this study, are they cherry picking information to just push an agenda? And number three, I want to know who's funding the study. Because if somebody's putting up a lot of money for the study, usually it's because they want a certain outcome. And if you have a lot of money and it's being funded by other people, usually you can get to any conclusion you want and then put it out on all of the outlets that you like. Now, this has a conservative bias because it looks better, right? They say 150% more chance of a person having mental illness if they're liberal. So of course, conservatives are going to push that. So who's paying them to put it out there but not actually look at the study? So I need to do that. So let's take a look at the source. So right at the top, the title of the study is called Mental Illness in the Left. I'm not going to tell you what to think, but does that sound like a legitimate peer-reviewed study from a scholarly publication? You can answer that, yes or no, for yourself. Let's continue. The company who published this is called Mankind Quarterly. So let's take a look at Mankind Quarterly. Very easy to do. You can look this up. It was established in 1960. The aim of Mankind Quarterly was to scientifically prove that segregation between white and black people was needed. They did not believe that races should be mixed. They believe in the genetic superiority of the white race. They've been described as the cornerstone of scientific racism and as a white supremacist journal. The Mankind Quarterly supports racism, fascism, eugenics, which, for those who don't know, it's basically a cleansing of people to get to a superior race, which is what the Nazis adopted. They have right-leaning politics. I don't know if you would say that they're right-leaning. I think they're so far on the side, they're sleeping on their side. But definitely far-right politics. They believe in concepts such as the cold weather theory, which is that if you were born and raised in cold areas, you had probably a higher IQ. And if you were born in a place that had a higher temperature, your IQ would go down. Now, on the surface, that sounds a little ridiculous, but not terrible. Most people wouldn't look into it. But the real reason why they're saying this is because in places like Denmark, Norway, Sweden, places like this that are cold, there are no black people. So what they're saying is that black people who live in Africa or are born in Africa or come from Africa, their genetic makeup is that they have to have a low IQ because the sun is warm in that area. They actually are pushing that. To continue, again, I said, buckle up. This is going to be a rough ride because I don't even like to say, I don't like these words coming out of my mouth, but this is the stuff that they push. I warned you. So if you want to cut off now, you can do that. Mankind Quarterly pushes and supports that they believe the IQ of black people is equivalent to a white 7-year-old child or a white retarded adult. I told you it was going to be tough. But listen, here's the thing. I don't know who's worse. The people funding this, the person putting this information out, or the thousands upon thousands of conservative news places putting this out as general information that's supposed to help people. This is where this information comes from. Now, let's look at who's funding this, because it will tell us a lot about where they want to go in terms of getting an outcome. And if they get an outcome they don't like and they're funding it, they'll probably ditch the whole process, right? You understand what I'm saying? This is funded by the Pioneer Funding Group. Their stated purpose: to advance scientific study of heredity and human differences. They are described as a hate group by the ACLU. Now, they have funded distribution in churches and schools of Nazi propaganda about eugenics. Again, eugenics is that they believe that you can improve a population by controlling their quote-unquote breeding, which is ideas pushed by the Nazis. Now, let's get back to that for a second. It was really interesting. If you're a person out there that likes to think, and don't think like me, I'll just throw the information. Why does it seem like white evangelical Christians are not even remotely decent people or Christian? Right? Like, they fell in love with a former president, let's say. I'm not going to name his name, but he's not the president now. He's the president before the guy we have now. And they loved a guy that was in no way living like a Christian, but they loved him. In addition, think about Jimmy Carter, who's liberal, who was a Democrat, who is an evangelical Christian. But evangelical Christians in the United States South don't like him at all. I thought they were evangelical Christians following the same God. No, so you got to ask yourself what the God is. It's because a lot of evangelical Christians down south in the United States, they don't have a lot in common with Christianity in the Bible. What they do have a lot in common with is Nazi propaganda, number one, and big business, number two. And again, if you think I'm a jerk for saying that, the Pioneer Fund specifically targets evangelical Christians with Nazi propaganda. It says it. They're not even hiding it. So don't blame me for pointing it out. You can't make this stuff up. It's very disturbing, to be honest with you. Very disturbing. So that's the Pioneer Funding Group. Let's take a look at the author. The author of the study is Emil O.W. Kierkegaard. Is he a PhD? No. Is he in the mental health field to be putting out information like this? No. He's none of that. He does have a 4-year degree in linguistics, so he knows how to speak to people, I guess, and communicate. But that's about it. His contribution to the mental health field is zero, and he has no credibility whatsoever, unless, of course, you're a conservative radio show host, and then you just go running down the street with this stuff. Let's take a closer look at Mr. Kierkegaard. Again, buckle up. It's a rough ride. Sorry to do this to you for anybody who's going to be offended here, but this is hard to read. He is a Danish, again, Denmark. What a shock. He thinks that people from Denmark, because it's colder there, are smarter. What a shock, right? He's a eugenicist. He's an activist for legalizing child pornography. Let me say that again for someone who's driving down the street and somebody cut you off and you didn't hear me say that about this person who all these conservatives are citing his work. He's an activist for legalizing child pornography. He's a global warming denier. What a shock. He's an anti-feminist. Big shock there. He's an ableist. I don't even know what an ableist is. My brain doesn't work that way, so I had to look it up. What it is if you are disabled, any problem, mental health or physical, if you're in a wheelchair, he thinks you should be killed. Do you still want to go to bed with this guy, conservatives? Do you? Do you want to push his material? Do you? I know the answer to that. The answer is yes. So he's anti-vegan, which that's up in the air for anybody. I'm okay with that. He's a homophobe and an Islamophobe. Yeah, no. What a shock. He's a transphobe and has promoted white supremacy. Of course. He is most notorious for his ableism and calling transgender people liberals, feminists, and pretty much anyone with left-wing political views as mentally ill. There's your study for you right there, the top. What's the name of the study again? Mental illness in the left. They just finished saying that, right? He says it. Everybody who disagrees with him is mentally ill. And then he pays people to come up with a study and calls it peer-reviewed, and it's not peer-reviewed. It's peer-reviewed by other people that are white supremacists who pays off. Can we talk about this in people that have more subscribers than me, please? Should we continue with this very interesting character? He attacks anyone who points out that he is a white nationalist. His writings on race and intelligence have caused controversy. And because peer-reviewed journals refuse to publish his work, he set up the Open Psych pseudo-journals. However, after the journal was discredited, he now publishes pseudo-scientific race articles in the Open Access Psych Journal. No legitimate place would want his articles. Anybody who peer reviews this and is okay with it is not legit. That's why he opened up his own place to rubber stamp his racism. People need to know this. All right, so consider the source. I think we did that as our first question here, right? Is it a legitimate study? No. Are they cherry picking information? Yes. Who's funding the study? A racist organization that thinks what they think. I'm not going to repeat that garbage again. It was horrific the first time. So let's try to see if they do know how to perform a proper study. So what they did was, they got their information by doing what's called self-report. They asked people. Now, let's go right off the top. Self-report is not accurate data. Self-report is an individual's opinion. It has nothing to do with fact. You have to expect the person to have incredible self-awareness, which most people don't, and you have to expect the person to be 100% honest, and most people are not. That's why self-reports are not a valid way to do studies. They're nice to do little polls and things like this, but it's not a valid study. Just for fun, let's humor them. Let's see the questions that they asked. 5 questions. Number 1, do you have any emotional or mental disabilities? Now understand, This guy thinks you should be killed if you have any disability. But let's keep going. Number 2, how many days in the last month have you experienced anxiety, depression, or problems with emotion? And number 3, in the last year, have you sought counseling, received counseling, or felt you had a mental health issue? Now, here are some basic problems with this. If we look at the data, we can very easily and correctly say, when we're looking at conservative versus liberal, men tend to be more conservative. So let's use that number. They admit to this, actually, in the paper. Let me think about it, right? Like if you think about white supremacists, right? There are women white supremacists, but they're more men. Ask a man, do you have any emotional or mental disabilities? You think a man's going to tell you the truth? Listen, no men, I don't know any men, typically, that want to talk about their emotions and feelings and say that there's something bothering them, there's something wrong with them. If you do get a man like that, typically he's a little more on the liberal side, right? So again, the question is slanted in a way to make conservatives look good. The other part of that is, if you can't admit that you have anxiety or depression, that's an illness? No, that's courageous. That's something that's good. That's why, as you read through this, they say women are much more likely to be liberal, women are much more likely to have mental health issues. And that's because, according to these 5 questions, women are much more likely to say, yes, I have some anxiety. Yes, I have some depression. Yes, when this happens to me, that happens to me, when somebody betrays me or treats me wrong, I have some emotional situations at that point. Men don't admit to that. So again, this study is nowhere close to being legit. Let's continue with this. Since when have you met a man who's completely in touch with their emotions, especially a conservative one? Continuing, part of the questions are, have you looked for help and have you received help? That's not a negative, by the way, for asking and receiving help. But let's also look at the other parts of that. How many men do you know that want to go to therapy? I mean, I am a therapist. I would say 90% of the clientele is female. And the other 10, let's say 5% out of that last 10, it's because it's when their wife brings them to therapy, kicking and screaming. That's what it is. I mean, in marriage and family therapy, it's really, typically it's not the man saying, I really want to make this relationship work out. They don't want to talk to another person about their personal life. So again, if you're going to ask a man and you're going to judge him by if he never called for help as being he's mentally healthy, that I can't believe that so many thousands of people are going along with this study. It doesn't make sense. Emotions or feelings are very ephemeral, let's say. They're all over the place. You don't know. It's hard to judge that, right? Like my anxiety is a 3, a 4, a 5. It's hard to really put steady data on it. What we can put data on is actions. And one of the major actions when we're talking about in the mental health field would be, say, suicide. And in that sense, men are 4 times more likely to commit suicide than women. Now, if a woman, let's say her husband dies, she is more likely to commit suicide. I think it's like, I forgot, I don't have the number in front of me, but it's like 7 times more likely. But if a man's wife dies, he's like 20 times more likely to commit suicide. Is that any measure of health? Absolutely not. But it's not going to come up on these questions. Let's continue with this. When you look at people like, say, the police or firemen or the military, you know, generally, I mean, I know there's women in those things, I get that. But for the most part, it's considered to be a very masculine type of professions. And because of that, they tend to be a lot more what we would call conservative. They buy into this conservative ideology that I have no emotions and feelings, I just act. I'm a robot, whatever needs to get done, I get done. But in the end, they end up killing themselves, right? So there's a final action for you that you can really judge as being mentally healthy or not. So just because they don't admit to things doesn't mean that they're a healthy person. We can take a look at this. The military, police, and firemen, compared to the general public, they're more likely to be addicted to drugs and alcohol. They're more likely to commit suicide. They're more likely to be involved in some type of domestic violence. Again, those numbers don't show up on studies like this and questions. But there is no way that you could say, a person that says, oh no, I don't have anxiety or depression, yet they're drinking their feelings away, or they get annoyed and they go and punch their wife in the face. And this is not on these types of studies. They don't want to know about that. So you can't judge men and women the same. I'll continue with that. If a woman feels anxiety and depression, typically, not always, typically, they go inward. So they feel the anxiety and depression to themselves. Men tend to explode outward, and they tend to wreak havoc on the world. A man may not say he has depression or he's feeling anxious, but what he will do is be extremely angry. He'll be extremely frustrated. He will drink himself to death. He will be violent with other people. He will be very oppositional, argumentative. Do these things come up in these studies? No. That's why women always rate higher on anxiety and depression than men do, because they don't ask the men the proper questions. Men typically exude antisocial behaviors when they have anxiety and depression. That's another reason why this test or this study is absolutely invalid. I have a ton of more information. Like I said, I really was going to talk about, why it is that liberals do experience a lot of anxiety and depression in the world. And I was going to use this study to help out. But, they didn't even hide that this is written and funded and pushed by white supremacists. So I had to stop there. I needed to give you about, 22 minutes of information just on that. And if there's anything else that's helpful in this video, I hope, is that, listen, you need to consider the source. Don't listen to somebody because they have 3 million, 4 million subscribers or they're popular on TV. That's not it. There's a reason behind all that. They're not saying. I can't even say these people that I'm talking about, I'm not going to name names. I don't even know if they believe the things that they're saying. I just know that there's a lot of money in being a grifter and being able to go along with this angry white male type of thing that's going on these days, where you somehow think it's manly to be oppositional and angry and say that the world owes me something and acting like a victim all the time. There's a lot of money in that these days. So I will do another show, and I'm going to get a little deeper into the show that I actually wanted to. But know this, on all the current things you're seeing today, it all goes back to this one study that they're all referencing. So I hope that was beneficial to you today. My name is Joe Peroni. This is the Rise Above Project. And please, if it's in your heart, send this to somebody and subscribe, because I'm tired of all these people that are white supremacists and other people who are hurting people and other people who are taking this white supremacy information and they're getting blown up with popularity. Sometimes the evilness has to stop, right? Like good has to triumph over evil sometimes. Anyway, thanks for listening. I'll be back.